The TT has been an enormous part of my life because my father rode at the Isle of Man from 1920 until 1935. I was born in 1923, so I went over to the Isle of Man, first of all, in my mother's arms, virtually, when I was 2 years old. And then from then until 1935, when my father retired, I went over every year. And my mother used to say I irritated her enormously when I was about 5 years old, because I would sit in a very privileged position in the grandstand reading my comic and totally ignoring my dad, who was racing in front of me and doing well. But I say it's been an enormously important part of my life, and I know I'm biased, but if you look at the background, it really, really is an incredible event. First of all, you've got the Isle of Man itself. What is it, 30 miles long by about 10 miles wide. And it's a beautiful island, and an awful lot of people in Britain don't know about it, don't know where it is, have never been there, would never think of going there. But it's got the most fabulous scenery. And when you take into account that a beautiful place like that, which is enormously welcoming to the TT, that's something else you can't do anywhere else in Britain, the way the TT does. They have a lot of fabulous road racing in Northern Ireland, but even that isn't like the TT, because you've got this absolutely incredible 37.75 mile course, which is on public roads, specially closed for the occasion. And it's not motorway stuff, it's not twin carriageway stuff, it's single carriageway roads, admittedly to a very good standard. And they go right the way round the whole island, and they take in 2,000 foot Mount Snaefell. There's another thing that's unique about the TT is that it's not a race in the conventional sense of the word, with riders wheel to wheel against each other, all starting together. They all start separately. So it is a time trial. You leave the Glen Crutchley Road, the start, and plunge straight down Bray Hill. Now, I had never been to Bray Hill until a couple of years ago, because I was always in the commentary box. But they go past the grandstand on the Glen Crutchley Road at about 170 miles an hour, and that's flat. And then they drop down Bray Hill, which is very steep indeed, and there's a right-hand bend at the bottom. And you can go and stand, if you're lucky enough, in one of the front gardens of the houses. I just come past about 180 miles an hour and taking this right-hand bend at the bottom. And you can go there and you can see it happening, and you can't believe what you have just seen. And then they go on to where my first commentary point was in 1949, Ballacrane, which is about 7 miles out, and on to Ramsey, which is about 24 miles out. And then the next 10 miles are the mountain, from mile 24 until about mile 34 at Craignabar. They go up 1,200 foot Snaefell, down the other side, onto Governor's Bridge, which used to be part of the roads of the Isle of Man, but is now bypassed by the normal traffic, but still used for the TT races. So you've got a unique island with wonderful support from the government, wonderful support from the population, because I think they're great. I mean, to be brutally honest with you, I wouldn't want motorcycles blasting past my house noisily all the time during TT week, and it's a fortnight, because there's a week of practicing and then there's a week of the racing itself. So the local inhabitants have to be and are extremely tolerant. Motorsport racing, motorcycle racing, is about two things in particular. It's about the bikes and it's about the people who ride them. And over the years, the Isle of Man has had the most amazing history. I mean, in 1907, on the short course, the motorcycle was in its infancy. My father told me that when he was racing in the TT, and he started racing in 1920 after World War I, The road, if you can call it that, up the mountain was literally 2 cart tracks where the horses and carts went up. And he said, when you got to a certain point on the mountain, you had to decide which of those 2 cart tracks you put your front wheel into, and you stayed in it for a long, long way. And Keppel Gate, which is one of the famous points on the Isle of Man TT course, was in his day literally a gate which was opened for the race. It was on the mountain, and the riders rode through the gateway. And my father was always ticking about this, and he woke up one morning in his hotel room, and outside the door of his bedroom there was one of the vertical gate posts of Keppel Gate, which some friends of his got up and dug up out of the ground and decorated with ribbons and cauliflowers and things. And that took some of the sting out of Keppel Gate. I was a little boy, and I used to stay in the Castle Mona Hotel in the Isle of Man, which was the place to stay at. It was the ancestral home of the Derby family, and it's a little known fact, I believe, that the Derby horse race actually started in the Isle of Man. And I say the Castle Mona Hotel was the ancestral home of the Derby family, and that's where all the top people stayed. I would go down to breakfast in the morning, and the riders, people like Jimmy Simpson, Wal Handley, Tyrrell Smith, my father, would all come down to breakfast in their leathers, as they did in those days. And their racing leathers were very different from the ones nowadays. They were big, bulky things, and they would sit down and have breakfast. In my father's case, a very light one. And then off they would go and ride in the race. And they were all uncles to me. Jimmy Simpson, the man who was the first person to do the 60-mile-an-hour lap in the Isle of Man, the first person to do a 70-mile-an-hour lap in the Isle of Man, the first person to do an 80-mile-an-hour lap in the Isle of Man. And Jimmy Simpson, who famously won just one TT, a lightweight TT on a Rudge, he was my Uncle Jim. Jimmy Guthrie, one of the most famous riders of all time, and certainly one of the greatest TT riders of all time, was the Norton team leader, and he would come down in his leathers. And Stanley Woods was a god before the war. Jovial Irishman, lovely man, and he had a toffee factory, made toffee, sweets. And every year, Stanley Woods brought me a 4-pound tin of Stanley Woods TT toffees. And Stanley would come down and have his breakfast now. I mean, and they would all be my uncles, but sometimes Uncle didn't come back. And there have been quite a few famous riders in my past who didn't, who paid the supreme penalty at the TT. The TT is dangerous. It's on public roads. There are buildings all the way around it. There are earth banks, there are walls. You are taking corners at unbelievable speeds. And there are parts of the course where if you make the slightest misjudgment, you are going to hit something very hard. And as I talk to you, there are well over 200 people who have been killed during the life of the TT, which began in 1907. Nobody takes it without knowing in their heart of hearts that it is a very dangerous event, and they could injure themselves, or at worst, they could kill themselves. But if you are going to deny mankind the right to take risks, even if his life is involved, I think that would be a terrible thing. It has become a lot safer because there is now the most sophisticated communication system and marshalling system and medical facilities, but it is dangerous and it always will be. My father rode from 1920 to 1935. He was a Sunbeam Works rider. He was a Norton Works rider. This is the piston from the engine of the Norton motorcycle, which with a sidecar attached. My father finished second in the 1923 sidecar TT. But he was basically a solo rider. His main success was with the Rudge Whitworth team. And in my father's day, the races were 7 laps long. They're much shorter than that these days. And he won in 1931, and I have what is quite a famous photograph of me in my school cap standing alongside him after he's ridden into the paddock, with me looking very proud and him looking very proud too. But then my father, when he retired in 1935, became the BBC's motorcycle racing commentator and remained so until 1962 when he died. And believe me, I am a very pale shadow of my father. He was an absolutely brilliant commentator, particularly at the TT, because he knew the place like the back of his hand. He knew every bump in the road, every blade of grass in the banks, every twig on the trees. And he had a brilliant gift of being able to talk riders round when he was broadcasting. My father rode against Jimmy Guthrie, he rode against Stanley Woods, he rode against Wal Handley, all the top people of his day, and they weren't nobodies, they were some of the most famous riders of the TT's history. And he beat them all on occasion. Yeah, they beat him on occasion too, and maybe they beat him more than he beat them, but I'm proud to say that he certainly did beat them. So although a lot of motorcycle racing enthusiasts nowadays are enormously keen on the history of the events, they probably don't know as much about them as I do. Take Jimmy Guthrie, for instance. Scotsman, came from Hawick. Jimmy Guthrie was a very quiet, friendly, polite, calm individual. And he rode with his head, and he was certainly one of the greatest riders. Off the top of my head, I think he won 6 times. Now, 6 times doesn't seem very much nowadays, because you've got people like Joey Dunlop and John McGuinness who've won many, many, many times. But in those days, there were only 3 races at the TT. There was the 250 race on the Monday, there was the 350 race on the Wednesday, and there was the 500cc senior TT on the Friday. So to win 6 races over that sort of, during that sort of situation was a heck of an achievement. And he didn't just win 6 races, he got a lot of places as well. And he had a beautiful style, did Jimmy Guthrie. The way he rode the bike and the way he tucked himself away was something. But I will remember him as a charming, quiet, friendly man who rode a Norton motorcycle, because all his real successes were on Norton, like a man possessed. And his chief rival at that time was the greatest TT rider of all time up to 1939, and that was Stanley Woods. And now I've given you the extremes of how people may see a motorcycle racer, flamboyant or quiet. Jimmy Guthrie was quiet. Stanley Woods, an Irishman, came from Dublin, was just the opposite. He was loquacious, eloquent, very friendly, always talking, always having fun. And he had a very, very long career, because I think I'm right in saying that his first TT was in 1923 on a Cotton, and he rode right up to the war, 1939. So he had a 16-year career in the TT, during which he won 10 times.